It's in the July. It's my birthday, actually, as I'm filming this. So happy birthday to me. I had to announce that because I'm a Leo. Anyway, I figured today would be a good day to do my July wrap up. It's not the end of July yet. I still have like 3 or 4 days, and I usually don't like filming these until the month is over. But I'm taking the bar the last 2 days of July, and then I'm leaving to go on vacation. So I figured it would be best to get this out of the way while I still can. Anyway, I read 11 books in the month of July. They're all right here next to me. Let's get into it. The first book that I read in July is The Measure by Nikki Erlich. This book takes place in a world where one day everyone wakes up and there's a string on their doorstep in a little box, and the length of the string determines how long they have to live. And as you can imagine, chaos ensues. It follows a wide cast of characters. Some of them have long strings, but some of them have very, very short strings. It follows the world as it delves into political chaos as people start like shooting up areas in response to their short strings or in response to not being able to get medical care or stuff like that. Like, it basically just follows everything that could possibly happen if something like these strings were introduced to America. They're around the world, but this book focuses on America. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I did read some reviews on Goodreads that were talking about, like, they were complaining about how this book didn't give any answers about the strings. Like, it doesn't explain where the strings came from or like who crafted them and put them on everyone's doorstep. So I think if you're someone who needs like a lot of answers about the things that you read and you can't just accept things for how they are, maybe you wouldn't like this. I also think you wouldn't like this if you don't like political stuff, because this book really delves into the politics of how America would react if the strings were introduced. And one of the characters that you're following is even like a political candidate for president, so that plays a major part in this book. Like, overall, this book is less about where the strings came from and more so how the world would change in reaction to the strings. And as someone who loves politics and as someone who doesn't need answers about the stuff I read, it was a good fit for me. I do agree with some of the reviews that say that the characters could have been fleshed out a little bit more, but personally I didn't really notice that while reading. I was really into this book when I was reading it. I think now that the month has passed, I'm less into it. Like, the 4 stars is a little bit less strong now, but I still did enjoy it when I was reading it. Overall, I just found the premise to be really fascinating, and I loved the politics that the author delved into. I saw another review saying that the author was relying on political stereotypes, but I don't agree with that. I think that she actually had a pretty good portrayal of like how America would react to something like the strings. And honestly, I think she was a bit optimistic, because I could easily see America having a much worse reaction because we are America and we are the worst country in the world. That's a good start to the video. Just start complaining about America. That doesn't polarize anyone. Anyway, I think overall, if you're interested in the premise, that you'd really like this. And if you're interested in politics and not put off by not getting any answers, then you'd really like this. After that, I picked up Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This book follows... what are their names? This book follows Miri and her wife Leah. Leah went on like a deep sea expedition for this company that she was working for, and this book takes place after she's come back, and she has greatly changed. She's not the person that Miri once knew, and she's acting really weird, and that's all I want to say. I think you have to read the book to really get into it. And honestly, this is another book where you don't really get many answers. It's kind of just this eerie, unstable atmosphere. I really, really enjoyed this book. Like I said, it was eerie, and I love that type of setting. I love that type of atmosphere. It also had really lush prose. Like, it was just a gorgeous book to read. It's just weird and definitely not for everyone, but I really loved it. And I guess like my new niche is horror books dealing with grief, because that's this one. It's also Monstrilio, also like a couple other horror books I've been reading and I've been really loving. So if you have any recommendations based off of that, please leave them down below. And overall, I gave this book 4 stars. But like, comparing it to The Measure, this one has more sticking power than The Measure does. So that's making me feel iffy about the ratings, but I'm going to leave them as they are. After that, I read Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. I did not like this book, which sucks because I really like the cover. I bought this book years ago. I think it came out in 2016. I think I bought this book in like 2017, 2018. And I remember really wanting to read it, but this was such a letdown. Essentially, you're following 2 people who get married and just their lives together. Like, not a lot happens plot-wise. You're kind of just following them throughout their daily lives and stuff that happens throughout their lives. The main character, the male, his name is Lotto, and he grew up with a lot of money. But once he marries Mathilde, I don't know. Once he marries her, his mother disowns him and they don't have any money, and he becomes like a playwright. It's sounding boring because it is boring. And then about halfway through the book, you're switching to his wife's perspective of things. And I guess the overall point is like how two people can see things very differently and have different experiences in the same marriage. But my God, was this a drag. I could barely get through it. I had to read this in combination with other books just to get through this one. I gave it 1.5 stars. I hated it from the beginning and I should have put it down, but I'm very stubborn. A big issue that I had with this book was the writing. I'm not gonna say the writing was bad because I do think it was like decent, but I feel like the author was just writing things from a very like distant viewpoint, if that makes sense, and it just made me feel very disconnected to the characters. And she also made the characters like say things that I felt like people would never say. Like there's one instance, I can't remember exactly what happens. I think it's after Lotto's dad dies and his mother moves them into like not a mansion, like a working class house, and he gets all mad and he's little. He's like 8 or something. And he says to his mom, betrayal. And that's all. It's just like, that's not how people talk. Like, it was just really bugging me. It just made it nearly impossible to feel anything for the characters. I hated Lotto. I found him insufferable. His wife was a bit better, but I still didn't like her. And there are also really long segments of Lotto's plays in here, which I just could not get through. I ended up skipping, which maybe made me like lose something, but I'm lucky I got through this book at all. So I'm not even gonna criticize myself for that. They just really added nothing to the story. Overall, this book just felt so fucking long, so boring. I can't wait to get rid of it. And I gave it 1.5 stars. And then at the same time I was reading that, I was reading a much, much, much better book, which is Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. This is a hard book to describe. You're essentially following a woman whose wife, whose name was X, just died. And X was a very polarizing figure. She was an artist, and an artist of like many different art forms. Like she wrote, she made like fine art, she did a whole bunch of like performance art, stuff like that. And so after she dies, she's lived a very private and secluded life, and most people, even her wife, don't know much about her. And so after her death, a biographer takes up this cause and writes this biography about her that makes her wife very mad. And so her wife goes into her own investigation of X's life. And this also takes place in an alternate reality United States. Not alternate reality, but just an alternate like history United States where the South seceded from America and it created different territories. So there's like the Southern Territory, the Northern Territory, the Western Territory, and the South became like, what's the word? I can't think. Theocratic. Like it became obsessed with religion, very Christian, very culty, very crazy. And her wife X, you find out in this book, actually escaped from the Southern Territory. Essentially, this book was just amazing. Like, it was so creative. I loved the politics of the Southern and Northern Territories and how she delved into that. I just thought that the author's creativity and imagination was really amazing in this novel. And honestly, I think this is the perfect book, which I do not say often. I rarely give 5 stars anymore, but this was a 5-star read for me. I was pulled into this book in the very beginning by the author's prose, which I just found to be beautiful. I underlined and took pictures of many quotes in this book, which is another thing I very rarely do. And like I said, my favorite thing about this book is its creativity. Like, it read like nonfiction, but a very, very, very interesting nonfiction book. But like, Lacey used citations and reference notes and stuff like that to flesh it out and make it feel like you were reading biography. And I also, again, really love the exploration of grief and love. And this was honestly the perfect book to read after Our Wives Under the Sea, because it's kind of similar in that way. Like another woman-loving woman exploration of grief. Like, it was great. I absolutely loved this book. It's a new favorite. After that, I picked up Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll. This is a book that was all over BookTube last year. It essentially follows a very famous serial killer in America, but it doesn't follow him, it follows his victims, and it kind of shows like how terrible the police were at capturing him and even believing the victims when they were talking about him and their experiences with him. And the author makes a very conscious decision not to name him and only to refer to him as a defendant, and I really liked that because there is really something to be said about the name recognition that serial killers get and the way that they live like in infamy. I just think that the author's messages in this book are incredibly important. Like the fact that she never says the serial killer's name, the fact that she talks about the incompetency of the police, and how she really highlights the victim stories and the victims' lives and shows that they were like fully fledged people with like bright futures ahead of them. I think that's really important. And I was expecting to really like this book, but I didn't didn't realize just how unputdownable it was going to be for me. I read this book in a single day. Other reviewers complained about the pace being slow, but I completely disagree. I was invested from the very beginning and desperate to find out what happened, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This one is like almost a 5, but a 5 is a feeling, and I got that for Biography of X, but not quite with this one, so this is 4.5 stars. Then I picked up Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. This book is a very, very interesting book. Essentially, you're following two trans women who are living in an apocalyptic version of America's future in which testosterone has driven like men to be absolutely insane and has actually turned them feral. Like they like hunt and eat people and like tear people apart. And you're following these two trans women who were taking estrogen at the time that this happened, and so they were saved from going feral. And these women are like scavenging through the United States, killing these men and harvesting their balls, which I then eat as a source of estrogen. That is the premise of this book. So it's a really, really interesting and cool premise. I love that you were following two trans women because I don't have a lot of trans rep on my shelves, which is definitely a me problem. But I've also found that a lot of trans rep can be found in like contemporary or like romances, and that's just not where I gravitate to. So having it in like an apocalyptic kind of sci-fi book is really much more my speed, and I liked having the representation in that genre. I really liked the overall premise and the fact that these men are just going feral by the end of these like trans women like saving lives. But it did take me a bit to get into this book, and they're also like, I hate saying this because I don't want to sound like a prude, but there were so many sex scenes. It was just like a constant thing, and at a certain point I was like, okay, like I want the action of this book to continue. Like I don't want to just hear about these people screwing. So I gave this book a 3.5. I did enjoy it, but it just isn't like a favorite. After that, I picked up The Art Thief, a true story of love, crime, and a dangerous obsession by Michael Finkel. I think I forgot to haul this book in my last haul. I want to show off these edges. Focus on it. They're like golden with little bats, and I think they're beautiful, and I'm obsessed with it. This is the Barnes & Noble Special Edition. I think this book is self-explanatory. It follows the story of this infamous art thief, and he was doing this in like the 2000s, like, or late 90s, and this man would just stroll into a museum in France and just like take things and slowly walk away. And he amassed over like 200 items of like priceless art in his possession, and he stole them with his girlfriend. This is a nonfiction read, obviously, and it was just super interesting. Like, it was really well written. It's a really easy, fun nonfiction to get into. If you're looking to get into nonfiction, I would highly recommend this one if you're interested in the subject. And the author did a really good job of fleshing out this man. I can't say his name. Stefan Breitwieser. I don't know how does... because it's French, but I don't know how French people would say Breitwieser. So there's my best guess. But the author did a really good job of fleshing him out to the point where like he felt like a real person, and you could tell that the author had spent a lot of time with this guy interviewing him, because I really felt like I started to know him as a character, as a person, and I almost felt bad when things started turning up against him, even though he was obviously doing very bad things. I just thought this book was crazy. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I picked up The Kite by Romain Gary. This is translated from the French by Miranda Richmond Moulot. Maillot? Mouillot. I tried. I didn't try that hard, but I tried a little bit. French confuses me, even though it's the only language I've ever studied other than English. And I think that's a French last name. Anyway, this book follows a young boy named Ludo who is coming of age in Normandy when he meets this girl named Lila. Lila is the daughter of this aristocratic Polish family who summers in Normandy, like near his house, and he just instantly falls in love with her. And she's starting to return his affections when Europe breaks out into World War II. and he quickly loses touch with her and has no idea what happens to her after the Germans invade Poland. And so he joins the French resistance, and he's fighting for his country, but he's also fighting for Lila and the hope that she's still alive because he's still desperately in love with her. I picked this up at a whim at a bookstore, having never heard of it before, and I had no idea that it was such a beloved novel in France. I definitely enjoyed it, but it wasn't a new favorite or anything like that. It took me a bit to get into it, and I feel like the middle of the book wasn't that strong. I also didn't understand a lot of the French references. Like, there's some references to French history and stuff, and I didn't understand that, but that's probably because I'm not the intended audience, so I'm not gonna like dock any points for that specifically. I will say I really loved Lila as a character. I thought she was just amazing, and I also liked that the author talked about the violence that women faced in World War II, like the things that some women had to do just to survive and the way that they were treated after the war. I thought that was a really interesting conversation that's often left out of books about World War II, and God knows we have so many books about World War II. All in all, I would definitely recommend this book, but I did only give it 3 stars personally, so if you're someone who really likes historical fiction, I'd recommend this. It just wasn't like the strongest historical fiction book I've ever read. And then the last 3 books I read this month are all part of the same series, which I've been binging for a while now because these are some chunky books. The first of which is Malice by John Gwynne. This is the first book in the Faithful and the Fallen series, and this is a hard series to describe because it's really high fantasy. You're following a really large set of characters and you get a lot of different POVs, but essentially you're following this land that's ruled by a bunch of different kings, although there is one technically like high king. And this land is basically about to break out into like a god war. There's 2 different gods. One is Elyon, which is the good one. One is Azrith, which is the evil one. And they're both kind of choosing their champions out of people in this land. And they're setting up for this huge war between these 2 forces of good and evil. But in addition to that, there's giants, there's big wolves called wolven, there's these things called drags, which are lizards that like the giants ride, there's dragons. Like, it's a really fun time. There's a lot of different fantasy elements in here. I gave this book 3.75 stars, which is funny because I never usually go for like quarter ratings, but I genuinely couldn't decide between a 3.5 and a 4 star, so it felt perfect to go in the middle of that. I did really enjoy this one. I don't think it's like a new absolute favorite though. I especially loved the last 100 pages because it was just non-stop action, and I like the world building as well, although I will say it was a little confusing in the beginning because there's all these different kings and there's all these different POVs that you're just being thrown into, and it was really hard to like grasp who was who. And like the first chapter of the book I had to go back after halfway through and reread it because I completely forgot who was in that chapter. I also found some of the POVs to be much more interesting than others, although that's just something that happens a lot of time when you have a lot of different POVs. After that, I picked up the second book, which is Valor. I gave this 3.5 stars. I still really liked it, but I just found it a little bit slower going than the first one, which I seem to be in the minority here because a lot of the Goodreads reviews do not agree with me. But it really just felt like Gwyn like saving the best action for the last 100 pages. Which is great for those 100 pages, but it makes for a slow book when they're like 600, 700 pages long. I also really hated, this is a trigger warning, the inclusion of rape in this book. I thought it was completely unnecessary and I hated reading about it. I just hate when it's mainly a male thing to add in rape in a book when it doesn't have to be there. And I felt like in this instance it did not have to be there, and I hated reading about that. And then the last book I read in July was Ruin, the 3rd book in the series. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was a really good continuation of the world, and I thought this one was a lot more fast-paced and like even with the action scenes, and I really enjoyed it. And I can't say anything else because this is so far into the series, I don't want to spoil anything. So there you go. Those are the books I read in July. Let me know what books you read in July down below. I have pre-filmed for all of August because I'm basically not going to be at my apartment for the entire month. So I hope you guys enjoy those videos, and I'll see you soon with another one. Goodbye!